Makes Me Wanna Holler by Nathan McCall. Chapter 10. Work. Of all the guys I hung with, Turkey Buzzard, whose family moved to Cavalier Manor from downtown, had the hippest father. Known around Portsmouth as Country, Turkey's old man was so hip that the fellas and I figured that he was a hustler. As far as I could see, the only people in our neighborhood who didn't bow before the white man were preachers and hustlers. I saw a big difference between Turkey's old man and the fathers of my other friends and me. They looked bent over and defeated. Country stood tall and proud. They seemed depressed and standoffish. Country often stopped in the den when we were shooting pool and laughed and joked with us. They were always dirty and tired. Country drove Cadillac Eldorados, sported a shiny gold tooth, and was always as clean as the Board of Health. I wasn't sure how Country got his money, but that didn't matter. All that mattered to me was that he chose not to earn his living slaving at the shipyard or bowing to white folks on some other gig. Turkey had an older brother who was definitely a hustler. He and his friends gave me my first inside look at those blacks who live and operate almost completely outside the white man's system. They make money doing business with other blacks and buy almost everything they need: hot appliances, food, jewelry, clothes from hustlers who sell the merchandise dirt cheap. The only time they interact with white folks is to buy insurance, vote, and pay their bills. The fellas and I spent many evenings shooting pool at Turkey's house. Sometimes, other hustlers who made their living on pool tables and crap boards came there to shoot pool, and I stood around and watched. Following his brother's footsteps, Turkey learned all the tricks of the street trades. He could shoot pool far better than any of us, and by the time we were 14, he was held in the crap games. We played Tunk and 21 Blackjack and got Turkey to teach us how to mark the cards and do the bait and switch with loaded dice. When hanging on the corner, I tried to imitate the small-time hustlers who came to Turkey's house. I walked around, constantly shaking dice in my hands, waiting for the next crap game to get underway. I didn't know nearly enough about the hustling life to make a living at it, but it seemed glamorous and appealing enough to want to learn. If my stepfather had anything to say about it, there was going to be no hustling, gambling in the streets, or carrying on. Besides the curfew he imposed on my brothers and me to try to rein us in, he tried keeping us off the streets by constantly giving us work to do. My old man had a serious thing about work. My brothers and I would wake up on a Saturday morning and he'd have a long list of things for us to do: rake the yard, cut the grass, wash the car, clean the gutters, sweep the walk. Through the years, that got on our nerves and tightened the tension already building between him and us. My oldest brother, Billy, used to complain, "Work, work, work. All he ever thinks about is work." As long as I can recall, my stepfather's life was controlled by work. It was all he'd ever known. He'd grown up on a farm in Milledgeville, Georgia, where he did backbreaking labor every day and learned to master with his hands skills that most college-educated people never learned. He dropped out of school after the 10th grade, left home to join the Navy, and relied on his strong work ethic to carry him through life. Although I hated him sometimes for trying to work us to death, I marveled at the things he could do. With our help, he converted our garage into a den and paneled the walls. He bricked the entire pathway around the side of our house, making a cobblestone walkway and patio that led from the front to the back door. He did all his own auto and household repairs. On top of that, he always did part-time work along with his full-time shipyard job. He used to tell my brothers and me, "If you work hard, you can get anything you want in life." But my brothers and I didn't see it that way, especially after we started going to Sterling Point with them to work in white people's yards. We saw my old man working hard and he had nothing. The white folks whose gardens we tended seemed to be taking it easy and they had everything. Tanned and rested, They looked like they were living well. My stepfather stayed so bone-tired from constantly working that he slept most of the time when he was home. It seemed that my brothers and I viewed everything in life differently than our old man. We represented two generations of blacks that had come up in very distinct places and times. Coming from the deep south, my stepfather believed that you had to ignore all the shit that white people dished out and learn to swallow pride for survival's sake. Cut from the civil rights mold, he believed blacks could overcome racism by slaving hard and making do with what little they had. But our more militant generation was less inclined to make those kind of compromises. As we were growing up, all that talk about patience and civil rights played out and gave way to more aggressive black power chants, which gave us a whole new look and feeling about ourselves. People had let their hair grow into long, thick afros. Defiant activists, such as the Muslims and the Black Panthers, appeared on TV, punching their clenched fists into the air and calling for equality now. Black singers such as James Brown blasted the radio airways with songs that urged us to fight back and build racial pride. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. African Americans were undergoing a radical change, and ripples from that change filtered into the heads of my brothers and me. We get pissed off at our old man for insisting we go with him to Sterling Point. With all that militancy as a backdrop for us, that work seemed strangely out of sync with the times. The Black Power movement signaled an end to the day when blacks bowed humbly to white folks. Yet there we were, literally on our hands and knees, working for white folks. In spite of his belief that work was the answer to overcoming racism, I could tell that race-related pressures at his full-time shipyard job were eating my stepfather up inside. He and co-workers who came to the house constantly complained about whites on the shipyard security force being promoted over more qualified blacks. When he wasn't sleeping, my stepfather drank a lot, and he usually got drunkest on the day before it was time for him to go back to work. He'd jump out of bed the next day, hungover and running late, and rush into work to meet the man. He bought a little old car, a powder blue Renault, that he used to drive to his job. Often when he woke up hungover and late for work, he'd jump to his security guard uniform like a fireman on an emergency call and go speeding out the cul-de-sac headed for the shipyard. The wheelbase of that little car was so narrow that several times my old man turned it over before he got out of cavalier manner. Passers-by helped him turn it back on its wheels. Then he'd get back into that car and zoom to work. The following day, he'd pull that Renault into the backyard, take a rubber hammer and bang out the dents. Over time, that car looked like it had been in the demolition derby. I saw striking similarities in most of my friends' fathers who were also heavy drinkers. The fellas and I called them Oilers because they drank that firewater to loosen up their tensions. They slept when they weren't working and drank when they weren't sleeping. They looked downtrodden and were so burdened and preoccupied with white folks that they seldom talked much with their children. One, Whiskey Bottle's father, always seemed tense unless he was drunk. Whiskey's real name was Johnny. We started calling him Whiskey Bottle and nicknamed his younger brother Baby Wino because their father stayed drunk all the time. He'd get drunk and stagger through the streets or fall down and pass out in his own front yard. Bimble's old man also drank a lot and stumbled around the streets sometimes, and Shane's dad would get drunk and go berserk in the house. I never heard my friends say they wanted to be like their fathers when they grew up. Why would we want that when we knew our fathers were catching hell? That would be like saying we wanted to catch hell too. If anything, we wanted to be the opposite of our fathers. We didn't want to work for the white man to end up like them. That's why I shake my head when I hear so-called social experts harping on the problems of black single-parent households. They don't seem to understand that the problems go deeper than that. A two-parent home is no better off than a single-parent one if the father is fucked up in the head and beaten down. There's nothing more dangerous and destructive in a household than a frustrated, oppressed black man. There was nothing more frustrating to me than looking for work. Whenever I went job hunting, I literally staked out strips of businesses on a given street and walked into each one to ask if they were hiring. Most of the time, the result was the same. They say they weren't hiring. Usually, by the time I got home in the evenings, I'd be tired and evil as hell. The times I did nail down work, it was toward the end of summer when it was nearly time to return to school. I saw that the summer job experience for my white teenage peers was very different from mine. I saw that wherever I went, whether it was with a friend to get a driver's license or to some office downtown, young whites my age already had choice summer jobs in air-conditioned offices where they could learn things. They weren't skilled workers, but they got jobs running errands, cleaning up, fetching coffee, anything to keep them from slaving on the back of some truck in the scorching heat. Whenever I saw white kids working in those places, I filled out applications to work there too. The people running those offices would look at me like I was crazy. They seemed to be annoyed that I would even entertain the thought of working in the office with them. The white kids looked at me with that pompous air too, like they knew they were supposed to be there and I wasn't. Their attitude got on my nerves, but everything I saw around me suggested to me that they might be right. They had a serious inside track on the best summer gigs in town. When looking for work, many of them had to look no further than their own neighborhoods, where people owned their own businesses or held influential government or civilian positions and could set aside jobs for young white kids before openings were even posted. The only job contacts our parents had, if they had any contacts at all, were for manual labor jobs. Even then, they often weren't in a position to make sure that their kids or other kids in the neighborhood got the inside track. The summer of 1971, when I was 16, a bricklayer named Mr. Daniels, who attended our family's church, told my parents there were openings for construction helpers on the site where a shopping mall was being built near Cavalier Manor. I went there, applied, got the job, and started work. Almost instantly, I clashed with the white construction supervisor, who I later learned had wanted the helper's job for somebody else. It was my responsibility to get water and tools for the skilled workers and to supply bricks, mortar, and anything else they needed. I worked hard, but it seemed that nothing I did satisfied my boss. A tall, plump, pale man who hovered over everybody like an overseer, he fussed and cussed at me constantly. "When you gonna bring that water, boy?" The older black workers knew the supervisor was giving me hell, but they were too scared to say anything to him about it for fear they might jeopardize their own jobs. Every now and then, when the supervisor wasn't around, Mr. Daniels whispered encouragement and tried to keep me cool. "Young blood, I know he's a tyrant, but don't let him get to you. Just try to ignore him and do your job." I was tempted to quit after the first week, but I held on. I wanted the money, and I also wanted to demonstrate that my stepfather was wrong about me. He said my mother coddled me, and he argued with her sometimes about the best way to keep me off the streets. He'd say, "The boy needs a job, but he don't want to work. He's lazy." I suspected he was waiting on me to lose a construction job so he could prove a point to mama. Over the years, his and my relationship has soured to the point where we barely talk directly to each other about anything meaningful. Instead, we vented our complaints through mama, who became a referee between the two of us. Working that summer, I felt caught in a vice. I wanted badly to prove at that job that I wasn't scared of work, but it required painful psychic sacrifices to remain employed. It required me to take humiliation daily from a supervisor who seemed to think he'd been a slave master in another life. He'd bark orders at me like we were in the fucking military. "Get over there and take some more bricks to the crew. You gotta move faster than that. You act like you got lead in your britches, boy. I'd walk away mumbling to myself, boy? Who the hell is he calling boy? I ought to slap that motherfucker upside his head. But I kept my mouth shut and I did as I was told. The construction job forced me to develop two personalities that kept me in conflict with myself. Away from work, I was the badass nigga who demanded respect. On the job, I was a passive Negro who let the white man push him around. The suppression of my pride tore me up inside and messed with my head in a big way. I wonder what the fellas, or anybody who knew me, would think if they happened by and saw me taking shit off a white man like that. I never found out because the job didn't last. I lost it soon after my stepfather, driving the shiny new Cadillac, came to the construction site one evening to pick me up from work. I saw the supervisor glaring as I walked over, climbed in and rolled away. After that, he grew even more hostile. One day, during one of his harsh tirades, I exploded. Who the hell you think you talking to? I ain't got to take this shit from you. That was all the excuse the supervisor needed to fire me. I went home and told my parents what happened, and afterward, I heard through my mother that my old man cited my being fired as proof that I didn't want to work. That sealed the split between my stepfather and me. It frustrated the hell out of me that he seemed unable to understand the problems I had on that job had nothing to do with my not wanting to work. It had to do with my refusal to let arrogant white men humiliate me. Later, Mr. Daniels, the bricklayer who helped me get the job, told my parents that the construction supervisor admitted why he really fired me. He said if my stepfather had money to buy a Cadillac, that I didn't need a job. That wasn't the first or last bad experience I had working or job hunting, but it was one that turned me off even more to the whole notion of working in the system. After that, I took on the attitude about work that a lot of brothers I knew had. If getting a job means I gotta work for the white man, then I don't want a motherfucking job. Hustling seemed like the thing to do. With Shell Shock as my main partner, I tried every nickel and dime hustle I ran across, focusing mainly on stealing. We stole everything that wasn't nailed down, from school books, which we sold at half price, to wallets, which we lifted from guys' rear pockets. We even stole gifts from under the Christmas tree of a girl we visited. She left the room to get something, and we stuffed small gifts into our pants and coat pockets before she returned. One winter night when we went to a house party in Norfolk neighborhood, Shell Shock came up with another brainstorm. When we went inside, the host told us to leave our coats in the first floor bedroom. Hungrily eyeing the pile of leather, cashmere, and other stylish coats on the bed, Shell Shock whispered, "Nate, we can rip these niggas off." We partied for a while, then Shell Shock left and went around back. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, opened the window, and handed about 30 overcoats to Shell Shock, who loaded them into his mother's car. After we gotten all the coats, I said goodnight to the host and left. Driving down the highway, we laughed and joked about the ripoff. It's gonna be a lot of chilly niggas coming out that house when the party is over. Shell Shock had a creative criminal mind and a knack for finding ways to hustle folks. His cleverness fascinated me, and I picked up from him the habit of constantly being on the alert for opportunities to steal. One night, when we were heading to a nightclub in Norfolk, Shell Shock said, "Nate, hold up for a minute." He started checking car doors in the parking lot. When he found one unlocked, I served as a lookout while he opened it, reached in, and searched inside. He pulled out a key, slipped into the ignition, and started the car. I hopped in and we drove away. Riding down the street, I asked him, "Man, where did you find that key, and how did you know to look for it in the car?" He said, "I found it under the floor mat on the driver's side. A lot of babes leave a key there when they go out, just in case their pocketbooks get stolen or they get drunk and lose the main key ring." I never understood where he learned such things. We kept that stolen car for about 2 weeks, using it mainly to take girls out on dates, then ditched it at Crystal Lake. A bunch of us were sitting on the curb on our block shooting the breeze when the ice cream man drove up the street. It was scorching hot. Bored, we were waiting for the evening to set in when the temperature cooled and the girls came outside to stroll along the sidewalks. The ice cream man rang his bell and stopped a half block from us as excited young children ran outdoors, flailing their arms. When the ice cream man, who was white, got out the truck, Frog said, "Let's go fuck with him." There was no special plan. We just got up, drifted on over, and studied the scene. The ice cream man was so busy serving children that he didn't notice us surrounding him. While the fellas stood in back, watching the man go in and out the freezer, I walked to the front of the truck and peeked inside the cab, looking for a gun or something valuable to steal. I noticed he left the engine running. I quietly opened the door and slid inside, then stomped the accelerator and pulled away. As I drove down the street, I glanced into the big rearview mirror and saw the shocked ice cream man standing in the middle of the street holding popsicles in each hand. Instantly, the fellas took off running behind the truck, and the younger children took off running behind the fellas. I laughed, rang the bell, and waved at people I knew as I cruised down Roosevelt Boulevard in the ice cream truck. After driving about 5 blocks, I pulled over to the curb and gave the fellas time to catch up. When they reached me, Bimble said, "Take the truck to my house. My mama got a big freezer we can put the ice cream in." I drove the few blocks to Bimble's house. We opened the rear freezer and formed a line, unloading boxes of ice cream and stuffing them into Bimbo's mother's oversized freezer. When it was filled, I took the truck back to an isolated area near Roosevelt Boulevard and let the little kids get all the ice cream they wanted. We stayed at Bimble's house the rest of that afternoon, laughing, joning, and eating ice cream. When I left that evening, I took a back street home rather than travel down Roosevelt Boulevard past the crime scene. I hopped fences and came through a neighbor's backyard, entering my cul-de-sac from the rear. My stepfather was outside washing his Cadillac when I walked into the driveway. Just then, a police cruiser pulled up in front of the house. The cop got out and asked, "Does Nathan McCall live here?" My stepfather pointed at me. "There he is." I acted surprised when the cop said he needed to ask me some questions. The three of us went inside the house and sat down, joined by my mother. "Your son is a suspect in the theft of an ice cream truck that was taken on Roosevelt Boulevard a few hours ago. A woman named Mrs. Patterson says she saw your son take the truck." I feigned complete ignorance. "I don't know what he's talking about. I ain't seen no ice cream truck. I haven't even been on Roosevelt Boulevard. I've been down the street at Glenn's house all afternoon." To my surprise, my stepfather backed me up. "He's got to be telling the truth. I was out in the front yard for some time and I saw him when he came home. He didn't come from Roosevelt Boulevard. He came up the court from the direction of Glenn's house." At first, I was shocked. My stepfather would never cover for me if he knew I had broken the law. Then I realized that he really believed I'd been at Glenn's house. I guess the cop was convinced that my alibi was solid. He told my parents there would be an ongoing investigation, then he left. That was the last I heard of it. That heist boosted my rep in the neighborhood. Everywhere I went, guys said admiringly, "Yeah, man, I heard you ripped off an ice cream truck." I was proud. Not only had I proven that I had heart, but I had gotten over like a fat rat on the white man, and my stepfather had unknowingly helped me pull it off.